Imagine the truth in the Oklahoma bombing. Have we heard it all? Has the information gathered by the FBI, which is presented through the television and newsprint, is that all there is to the Oklahoma bombing? And why the sudden change in venue for Timothy McVeigh? And what is going on with this case? Why haven't they convicted him? Well, today's guest is going to discuss some discrepancies and perhaps give you a little different point of view as to what may be going on with the Oklahoma bombing and the case. It's nice to have you on the program, Ted.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
Now, maybe you could perhaps give us a little bit of your history, because you work for the FBI and you had some experience with terrorism and so forth, so maybe you want to elaborate so people understand where you're coming from.
I was an FBI agent from 1951 to 1979. At the time of my retirement, I was in charge of most of Southern California. I was the senior special agent in charge of the FBI Los Angeles Division. Then I went to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and coordinated security for the Pan American Games in the summer '79. Served as a consultant on the 1984 Olympics, and I've been very active in a number of high-profile cases ever since. I might mention also in 1977, I was awarded and honored as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of America by the AFL-CIO Middle Trade Council. And I've attended a number of seminars in specialized schools, including anti-terrorism school in Pasadena in my day. So I'm quite experienced.
So the Oklahoma bombing and the so-called terrorism, domestic or foreign, is very much right up your alley. I guess what I want to start with is there are some reports that perhaps we knew or individuals knew about this bombing ahead of time. Could you elaborate as to who knew about this and how?
Well, immediately after the bombing, there was a lady that stood across the street, and she recognized a man standing next to her as an ATF agent. And she asked him, where were you during the bombing? He said, well, we didn't have to come to work. We had a bomb threat or a bomb scare. We're told we didn't have to come to work today. None of the ATF agents were killed, by the way. They were all out on the surveillance that morning. And it's kind of interesting also that at 7:30 that morning, there's some witnesses who say that they saw the Oklahoma City Police Department bomb squad across the street from the federal building. So there are a number of a series of events and circumstances that are highly suspicious.
And what about the U.S. Marshals? I heard someone mention that they were given information that some federal building may be bombed within the next couple of months. I heard that that was put over the wire or something. Is that correct? Or
I have heard this same story, and as a matter of fact, the day before the bombing, some of my people that work with me went to the Veterans Hospital in Las Vegas, Nevada. And there was an armed guard there, and they wouldn't let one of them go in because he did not have identification. And then they went over to the Social Security Administration office, which is no reason to have armed guards over there. There was an armed guard there. They came back and said, there's something happening in the country. There's something going on that we've never seen armed guards at either of these two locations before.
Security and so forth. Now, was that coincidence, though, that these officers didn't show up that day? Is that normal? I mean, just to be on the other side looking at it, or is that something that's abnormal? That this doesn't happen very often, where none of these BATF agents show up.
Well, the BATF agents claimed that it was very normal. These were assignments. They were out working. One of the ATF officers claimed he dropped from the 8th floor to the 5th floor, the 9th floor to the 5th floor, at the time of the bombing on the elevator. And the elevator experts came over and said, no, that elevator has an emergency equipment on it, and there's no way it would drop under any circumstances. So there's some interesting discrepancies here. And it's very obvious that there's been an extensive amount of disinformation put out by the government on this case.
Well, it wasn't a militia attack. I guess that's one of the main issues, because we still hear everyone talking and linking it to the militia and the general public.
Well, what happened was initially, after the bombing, right after the bombing, there was an all-points bulletin put out on two Middle East-looking individuals in a pickup truck. And of course, then McVeigh was arrested by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol within 90 minutes afterwards. And according to one of my sources at the scene who was involved in the investigation and is a federal investigator, McVeigh was supposed to have been vaporized with the bomb blast. In other words, he was supposed to have been a patsy.
Right.
So I think what happened, and I have no way of proving this, is that they were surprised when McVeigh was arrested, so they had to kind of change their approach to the problem. And then I understand that an honest and dedicated FBI agent from Kansas City came out immediately, took the artist's conceptions of John Doe 1 and John Doe 2. It appeared publicly. Then you had McVeigh as John Doe 1. Well, what happened to John Doe 2? What happened to him? Where did he come from? And the artist conceptions were taken from the employees at the Elliott Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas. There were 3 employees that identified them together on the Saturday prior to the bombing when they came in and made reservations for the truck. They were also seen together at the Dreamland Motel in Junction City. And I understand and I know for a fact that there is a source in Kingman, Arizona who has seen John Doe 2 and McVeigh together and has identified John Doe 2. Also, the morning of the bombing, they left in the truck, the Ryder truck, shortly before 5 a.m., I understand. That's about how long it would take to drive to Oklahoma City. And they were early. And I theorize, I'm very careful about what I can document and what I theorize.
Right, okay.
I theorize that they wanted to be there precisely at 9 o'clock because that's the maximum number of casualties. Now, what happens, they were early, and so from 8:25 to 8:35, John Doe 2 was in the passenger side and McVeigh was driving the truck. They stopped at a Firestone parking lot, and the man in the lot identified McVeigh as the driver and identified John Doe 2 as in the passenger seat. They sat there for 10 minutes and they proceeded on down to the Federal Building. We think, meaning my staff and I believe, that this was a bomb that had to be detonated. We think that the reason it didn't go off at precisely 9 o'clock, instead went off at 9:02 and 3 seconds, was because there was a problem with the detonator. We think that John Doe 2 was the person that was actually had the detonator and detonated the bomb from a distance. Now, if McVeigh was supposed to have been vaporized and he was a patsy, which I suspect he was, then he would have gone up precisely at 9 o'clock when he pulled the truck in there, had the detonator worked properly. Instead, he had time to get out, go to the side of the truck where there was a door in this particular truck. By the way, the government put out that it was a 24-foot Ryder truck.
Right.
It was actually a 20-foot Ryder truck. The 20-foot Ryder truck has a door on the side panel. McVeigh would have had time to get out, open up the door, and leave the immediate area. He had 2 minutes and 3 seconds, right? So, think about it this way. He wasn't vaporized. He had an opportunity to get out. He went behind the YMCA and jumped in his automobile and left the scene.
With no license plates on it.
With no license plate on it. And then when he was arrested some 90 minutes later, why, of course, he was taken into custody. But the government waited like a day and a half, about almost 2.5 days before they released the artist conceptions, John Doe 1 and John Doe 2.
So they already had him in custody?
They had him in custody, but they claimed they didn't know he had been arrested. I think, I personally think that there was a period of confusion there. What do we do now? Because we put out an all-points bulletin for 2 Middle East in a pickup truck, whereas now John McVeigh has been arrested. What do we do? So there was this about a 2.5 day delay in announcing that McVeigh was John Doe 1.
So they had to make up their mind how they're going to handle it.
There's another interesting aspect here, John. The government claims that they solved the case through the Liberty Lobby telephone calling card that McVeigh had in his possession, supposedly. I saw a press clipping, and the government made the statement, McVeigh is not talking. However, in a paragraph later, 2 paragraphs later possibly, the Anti-Defamation League came out and said that the way they traced McVeigh was because he had this Liberty Lobby calling card in his possession at the time of his arrest. I checked with my source at the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, and this person checked the inventory property list when he was arrested. There was no Liberty Lobby calling card there. I think that's kind of interesting, don't you? So where did the government, how did the government learn that he had this calling card? Now I checked with another source, I'll tell you who it was, James Nichols, Terry Nichols' brother, who said that he knew that McVeigh had a Liberty Lobby calling card that he was using for long distance calls, but he had it memorized. Now, think a minute. He purchased the Liberty Lobby calling card using a fictitious name. He registered at the Dreamland Motel under another name, right? And the government claims that they were able to trace him and his activity for an 18-month period through 700 phone calls. How would the government have known about the Liberty Lobby calling card if he used a fictitious name? Unless somebody told him, right? Who do you think could have told him?
Timothy McVeigh.
Well, no. Timothy McVeigh's not talking. How about John Doe 2?
John Doe 2.
John Doe 2 was with him.
Right. Now that brings me full around. Is McVeigh and John Doe number 2, are they, I mean, because we look back in the Oswald case and so forth, do they have any connection to the government itself then? Is there any possibility of that?
Well, McVeigh was in the service.
Right.
He was in the Special Forces. The government claims he was washed out, right? And he was sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, and given a discharge. He became disenchanted with the government, particularly over the Waco incident. And the government knew that he was, in fact, disenchanted, and he was espousing, apparently, anti-government propaganda. And my theory is, and I'd say 99.9% sure that this is what happened, that the government actually planted John Doe 2 with McVeigh in order to foment the situation. And McVeigh thought that John Doe 2 was his buddy. And I think that John Doe 2 is the person that actually orchestrated the whole bombing.
Agent provocateur?
Agent provocateur.
Right. I guess I want to go on to then the discrepancies in regards to the bombs, because what we've heard, it's a fertilizer bomb, it's an extremely large one, this is what caused all the damage, but then I've read General Parton's analysis, I've read your analysis, and several others in different magazines where it shows that basically all of them come to the same conclusion, that it could not have been just one fertilizer bomb. They have some differences in what they believe did the causes, but it did not seem to be one fertilizer bomb, because it'd be almost impossible for the damage that was caused. Could you elaborate? What do you think?
Yes, I can. First of all, every expert I've talked to, and I've talked to about 24 experts, every expert has told me, from looking at the pictures, there's no way a 4,800 or 5,000 pound ammonia nitrate fertilizer bomb would have done the damage that was done in Oklahoma City. There's also another point here. The fertilizer bomb would explode in a radius of 360 degrees. If you look at the building, you can see there's one particular section of the building that is further indented than the other, right? So this was a directional bomb, we feel, or possibly a combination of bombs on the inside, bomber bombs on the inside.
Maybe both, yeah.
Maybe both. There's no question about it. It was not an ammonia nitrate fertilizer bomb, and we all agree on that. What type of bomb it was? We think it was a combination of ammonia nitrate and a sophisticated bomb. We initially declared we thought it was an electro-hydrodynamic gaseous fuel device bomb, which is a highly classified bomb. We happen to have the contract number, the government contract number. We wrote to New Jersey to obtain details on this particular bomb. We did not receive a response. This particular bomb, based on our research, was manufactured by the Dyna Nobel company out of Salt Lake City. They have a number of government contracts. Now, it isn't important whether it was our bomb or whether General Parton's theory about it being strapped to the pillars was true or not. That's not important. What's important is it was not an ammonia nitrate bomb.
Correct.
There's no question about that. Now, a 5,000 pound ammonia nitrate bomb was supposed to have been used in the World Trade Center bombing.
Oh, that's right.
Now, in the World Trade Center bombing, it didn't even knock down the post, the support beam. Now, there is an article out, you're holding it up now, which I provided you a few minutes ago, dated October 28, 1993, from the New York Times. This article documents that an FBI informant recorded his conversation with his FBI handler, and the FBI knew in advance they were going to bomb this building and did not prevent it from occurring.
They knew ahead of time.
That's in the article. It's in the article.
The New York Times.
Right, in the New York Times. It also appeared in the Los Angeles Times the same date. Now, what's going on here? Why would we allow that to occur when we had 6 people killed, 1,000 individuals injured, and $500,000 in damage? Now, I have a theory on this, John. The anti-terrorism bill was written during the Bush administration. One of the co-author of it, a lady attorney who's now in private practice in Washington, D.C., made the public statement that before this bill will be passed, people will have to be killed. I theorize that the government knew that the World Trade Center bombing was going to occur, did not prevent it from happening, and they didn't pass the anti-terrorism legislation because of that, because apparently there weren't enough people killed. So therefore, I contend that there's an evil element within the government that was behind the Oklahoma City bombing, And it was an incident that was created in order to hasten the passage of the anti-terrorism legislation that further destroys and corrodes our constitutional rights and civil liberties. That's
Right.
that's what I feel happened. I don't think there's any question about it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, most people don't know because I had a copy. I know I tried to fax you some of it in regards to the terrorist legislation. And anyone who even intends to influence government's conduct can be considered domestic terrorists. It's just that intention or speaking up. It could be any lobbyist, for example.
That's right. So the bomb is important. I'll tell you why the bomb's important. Because if the government can contain it to an ammonia nitrate bomb,
Right.
which could be assembled by a farmer
Any farmer.
who has no expertise in bombs, and it doesn't go beyond that, then that means that, that Nichols and McVeigh potentially could have made this bomb. If it goes beyond this to a sophisticated bomb,
Right.
then what we have is we have two people involved in the bombing who did not have the expertise or the knowledge or the ability to put together a bomb of this type.
And then it goes into conspiracy, which
Then-
people have a
Then
hard
we
time
go,
talking
how
about.
high up
that.
does it go then after that? That's right.
Exactly. Now, what about the fact that the firemen, from what I understand from hearing, I guess it was a journalist down in Oklahoma plus John Rappaport, because they had to stop the evacuation and trying to rescue operations because they found other bombs. Then they said later in the media that they were just a false alarm. And then someone also mentioned they went in to go get papers to do such. Now, what about that story? I was really interested in that.
I personally saw the CNN the first day, that particular portion of the news, where it showed people running
Right.
from the building because they announced that there was another bomb in there.
Right.
Now, I attended a lecture by Major Spencer from the Oklahoma City Police Department here recently, and he admitted that there were other bombs in the building, that they took one of them out, disguised as a body on a stretcher, and took it out to one of the bases, air bases there, and exploded it.
Did he say why? Why do they have to do it so
Well, I
subtly?
guess they didn't want to shock anybody.
Right. Well, then we have the seismograph too, which you mentioned in your report, and there's discrepancies there also, because if there's only one bomb, as they stated, or one ammonium nitrate, then what about the other reflection that occurs on the seismograph, which also they mentioned was just the building falling down?
Well, that's what they claim.
Correct.
There was an explosion, according to the seismogram, at 9:02 and 3 seconds a.m., and then there was another one at 9:02 and 13 seconds, 10 seconds later. No, excuse me, 10 milliseconds later. And, excuse me, 10 seconds later.
Right.
9:02 and 3, and then 9:02 and 13 seconds. So it'd be 10 seconds later, there was another explosion. The University of Oklahoma claims that there were 2 explosions. The officials claim that that was the building collapsing, the second explosion. Actually, this bomb that we're talking about, the barometric bomb, it goes like this. It goes boom, boom. And I talked to 2 people who were inside the building at the time of the explosion, and I asked them, both of them, I went to Oklahoma City, talked to them. I said, would you reenact what you heard? And they said it was like this, boom, boom. That close together, 2 of them. But you see, 2 explosions, boom, boom, that close together would only register once on the seismogram.
Right. So then you had the ammonium.
Then you had the boom, boom, we think, which would have been our bomb, the one that we described. And then 10 seconds later, you would have probably, I think, that the bomb, one of the bombs on the inside, possibly illegally stored by ATF, was
Right.
exploded.
Because they also mentioned, what was it, a rocket launcher? Is that correct, that they had found one within the building?
I'd heard this. I don't know any
Yeah.
details of it.
Now, what about helicopter sightings? I'm just bringing it up because there were a few witnesses on a video I had seen. I think it was by the Senator Alan Keyes from Oklahoma, mentioned possible sightings of that happening.
I'd heard this. Again, I haven't seen the documentation on it.
Right. Now, along with the fire department and the police department, has there been any other areas or people that have come forward, professionals, to document the fact that, number one, there was most likely more than one bomb, and number two, that perhaps there are others that were not detonated that they did find at a later time?
Well, all the, quote, professionals are the official government versions, of course. The rest of us, we're floundering around trying to figure out exactly what happened. We don't know. I think another interesting aspect of this, John, is that they destroyed the building and allowed, expeditiously destroyed the building and allowed the defense team to be on the site only for a 48-hour period. And I also know that they did not allow the defense team to take any evidence out of there.
So they can't do any, I mean, the evidence is buried then?
The evidence was taken out of there in trucks and taken out into a dump someplace. By the way, this report, along with other reports, is available through our office if somebody's interested in it.
Because I read the seismograph in the report and some other information that you documented in regards to what happened in Oklahoma. Now, Senator Alan Keyes, and some of the information he brought forward also mentions the fact that they may have an idea who John Doe number 2 is. Do you have any idea who possibly John Doe number 2 is? Because one article they think it's Terry Nichols' son or whatever, and I thought that was a 12-year-old boy.
Well, there's an article in the LA Times.
Right.
One paragraph contradicts another, and it goes on, and it's laughable.
Exactly.
It's a tragic incident, but the article itself is laughable. And Assemblyman Keyes, Charles Keyes from Oklahoma City, who has made extensive effort to identify John Doe 2, has said that he is a repatriated Iraqi. Now, there's another interesting aspect here.
That's interesting.
Yes, there's another interesting aspect. Hoppy Heidelberg, who was a member of the grand jury that indicted Nichols and McVeigh, has come forward and said that, in his opinion, the government refuses and has made every effort possible to keep information about John Doe 2 from being presented to the grand jury, and furthermore, in his opinion, the government's involved in a cover-up. This is a man that sat in on the grand jury proceedings and indicted these 2 individuals.
Is that why they moved to Colorado? Because suddenly the whole process was going through Oklahoma, and I thought, okay, they're probably going to resolve this case, and they're going to convict him, and be Oswald or whatever, we don't know. But then suddenly it was derailed and put into Colorado. What was the deal?
Well, the judge claimed that the judge was one of the victims in that he was across the street in the federal building at the time of the bomb explosion, and so many people there in Oklahoma City were personally involved. They thought it'd be difficult to obtain an objective jury for the case.
But what are your sentiments on that?
If you can obtain a jury in L.A. on the O.J. Simpson case, I think you could get one in Oklahoma City on the Oklahoma City bombing.
Exactly. Well, then the other thing that I had read, and I just want to see, what files were stored there? Someone told me that it's possibly, and I'm just going to elaborate on a few, possibly there's those from Waco, some from the Gulf War, and what happened in that in regards to arms sales and biological chemical warfare weapon research, and the other third thing was possible Whitewater papers. I don't know, I mean that leads to conspiracy, but were there possibly papers so they killed 2 birds with 1 stone?
I can tell you what actually happened.
Okay.
For a short period of time, right after the bombing, the rescue workers were in there bringing out the victims and working with the victims. And then all of a sudden, the government came in and said, everybody out, and they went in and gathered up papers while the victims were still there. Some of them were suffering, and possibly some of them even died. And then when they gathered up these papers, then they allowed the rescue workers to come back in and work with the people that were victims.
So it's something we don't know about, but we don't know what they stored in there. That was that valuable that they had to take it out of the building.
But think about
ahead of people dying.
Ahead of people dying. Think about that.
It's ridiculous. Now, as far as I was looking down the list here, a few other questions I was going to ask on. Do you feel that basically then this is a conspiracy on the lines that realms with the JFK? I mean, we still have so many people and so much information has come out on JFK, and even still some people cling to the fact that it was a lone gunman, but more and more people don't believe that. Do you really think that this goes into the government in certain factions, and in regards to who would that be? Which agency is most involved?
There's no question in my mind that the government has put out disinformation. There's no question in my mind that others are involved. Beyond Nichols and McVeigh.
Right.
And with that in mind, you have to have a larger conspiracy than what the government claims they have now. And as to who's involved, it wouldn't surprise me if it goes all the way to the top. Some of the decisions that came out in the course of the first 6 weeks after the bombing were just unbelievable. And I asked a friend of mine, I says, why do you think that we have all these contradictions coming right from the government? He says, well, in my opinion, it's cocaine thinking.
Sounds like Mina. And that's coming more to light too now. I mean, someone had mentioned the possibility that indictments were coming down around that time also, and that they're sealed. I had read that in another report. I don't know if you'd heard about that in regards to maybe Clinton or certain friends around Clinton.
In Mina, Arkansas? Or?
Yeah, something involved with that, that indictments were supposed to be unsealed, which they normally seal them and unseal them at a certain date. And then, of course, they couldn't do it because of all this tragedy. They didn't want to seal at that time. That's just a possibility. They gave the name of the judge and the case, I believe it was, and the indictments, but supposedly they're still sealed. And I'd like to find out if someone has looked into that to find out if that's possible.
Well, I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
I do know this, that the Mina, Arkansas drug operation, arms out of the country, drugs into the country, took place over a 10-year period when Bill Clinton was governor there, and it was a $100 million a month operation. It's been documented, and that the Arkansas Development Finance Authority was set up under the Bill Clinton administration, and Bill Clinton, in order to provide loans to citizens and to churches and schools and so forth and the students. And it was set up supposedly for that purpose, but it was actually used to provide loans to businessmen. In fact, Tyson Chicken was given a $10 million loan and never paid it back. And Bill Clinton signed off on every one of those loans.
What can we, I guess just to wrap it up real quickly here, what can we do as a public to try to make an effort to bring this to light? And what would you advise people?
We have to get the right people back in Washington, D.C. We have to repeal the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment provides for the state legislators to elect the senators, not for the people to elect them. And they're subject to recall anytime they don't fulfill their responsibilities and properly represent the state.
Right.
So I think the 17th Amendment is important. Also, I think it's important to elect the proper people. I'm running for President of the United States, by the way. So we need to elect the proper people, the proper politicians, people who have not been compromised by special interest groups, by the lobbyists, by sex and drugs.
Sounds great. Thanks for coming, Ted. I really appreciate it. It's been a good show here. And imagine the truth behind the Oklahoma bombing. It's time that we start looking at the discrepancies and stop worrying whether or not it's a conspiracy or whether it is, but the point is these facts need to be brought to light, and we need to find the truth so that we can hopefully start to revitalize this country and restore some faith in the people that are elected officials. Thank you. This has been Imagine.